thanks again for taking the time to speak to us. We really appreciate it. After medals at 3 consecutive Olympics, this is the first since 2004 where Team Singapore has not medaled. What are your thoughts on this, and how do you rate the contingent's campaign?
Mm. Well, Sazali, of course, when it comes to Olympics and competitive sports, in any competition, you do want the medals, and I think that's the highlight. So we didn't get that. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of positives that we can take away from this. We had a good spread of sports that we have competed in Olympics, and I think this bodes well when you look at the breadth of sports that we have taken part in. Also, the number of debutants who have made it this time around, I think 17, if I'm not wrong, is quite a large number. So also a good spread across sports. And finally, I think the individual performances of some of our athletes have really stood out. And I think if you look at a longer term trajectory, and bearing in mind that the next Olympics is actually just 3 years away, much shorter than other Olympics, I think there is a pipeline that's coming through healthily. And I think some of the individuals have already set their minds onto the next phase and taking a lift from the performances that they have put in these Olympics. So I think all in disappointing, and perhaps we wish we could have had medals. But I think the takeaway is that we've had some really strong performances individually, and I think that bodes really well for the future.
You saw quite a few, almost all actually, of the Team Singapore athletes in action. Was there one moment or one performance or one highlight that stands out for you?
Well, I think their performance on court, in the pool, on the track, I think we've all seen. But the one or two things that stood out for me is when I reached out to these athletes after they finished their match or their race, and asked them, after having lost in a match, their focus was really on how then can I do better? What's next for me? And I was really very encouraged by that. That shows that they have done their best, they're comfortable in their own skin, and now looking forward to the next challenge. So I think that is another marker I would take away as a positive.
Actually, I think you spoke to Joseph Schooling on the day after his race. What did you tell him? What did you tell him?
Well, Joseph wanted to meet with me just to get a sense of, have a conversation. When I met him at the pool, we went back to the same location, sat in the stands this time round, looking down at the pool. And I told him that, he has to, it will be tough on him. And I can imagine 2020 was a very different Olympics from 2016 for him, when he was quite an unknown coming through. And 2020, everybody's looking out for him. He's the Olympic record holder. He's the man to beat in the 100 fly. So I told him that, when you look back now, I think all of that pressure, whether consciously or otherwise, would have added to the demands on him. So I told him to really take some time off, free his mind, think about something else. He's got 14 days of SHN, read a book, I told him. And, after that, see his family, which he's really looking forward to, discuss it with them, with his coach, with the NSA, and then come back and discuss a plan with us. And we'll see how we can best support that plan. But for now, I think it's important for him to just free his mind from the current considerations, the comments, some positives, some negatives, but focus on himself. And I think he needs to take some time for himself now.
I did ask you about what pleased you. On the flip side, was there anything that I suppose that you didn't really like so much, or disappointed you? Does not have to be a performance per se, but anything about the Team Singapore campaign that were not fantastic.
At the end of the day, I think if not getting medals is a downer. I think in any, as I said, in any competition, you do want to play to win, and you do want the medals. So we didn't get that, and I think that is a downer for me. But as I said, there are many positives. I think we need to focus on that too, because it's a long journey for the athletes. You can't win all the time, which is another point I did make to Joseph too. That you're out there as a champion, you can't win all the time. The real test for us is how do we react when we've not got our way results wise. What then do we do? How do we hunker down and make sure next time we're out there competing, we can give a far better account of ourselves.
Just a quick one on the foreign sports talent scheme. I think my colleague David wrote a column on this. He said, with Feng Kenwei and Yu Ming Yu sort of retiring, table tennis a bit at a crossroads, and it appears that you will need the FST to achieve medals. Would MCCY support NCTA if they choose to go down this road?
Well, first of all, I will want to catch up with Tianwei and Meng Yi again and see what exactly their plans are, and see what we'll do with them. As I said, give them some time off and then we'll have a conversation. On FSTs, I think this is something we are not close to, but I think it's something that we really embark on for the long term. We don't want to take someone and in the next 1 or 2 years, we feel that person, unless it is in very exceptional circumstances. Having said that, you talked about a pipeline. I think we do have a couple of people coming upstream. You saw Ling Ye play in the team event in doubles and also in singles. She gave a good account of herself. I think beyond that, we have two promising doubles players who won the bronze in the last SEA Games, you remember, Rishuan and Singru. And I think they're coming through nicely. They're young. Further down the pipeline, we have a couple of young juniors. Jingyi has been doing very well, rated currently, I think, top 20 in the under 17 category. And also Ling Xian, who is number 3, number 5 in the under 15. So there is a pipeline. The question for us is, what do we do with it? And how do we ensure that the ecosystem, the support structure, and to me, most importantly, not just the training, but the exposure and the international competitive experience. I think, if I may say, looking back at the competition, one reflection on that is I felt that our athletes at the real cutting edge competition didn't get enough exposure in the lead up to the Olympics, partly because of the COVID situation. I mean, you saw Clarence; he had a good first match. He was quite dominant, and against the Austrian, I think he played well in all the games. He was close. He was never more than 2 or 3 points behind, and he kept the Austrian, on the edge. But I think at the crucial junctures, the points didn't go his way, and I think that comes down to the match sharpness and exposure. But we have Clarence coming through. He's coming together nicely on the men's side. We have Cohen, and then we have Isaac Quack, of course, a promising young boy. So we do have a pipeline. Challenge for us is, how do we ensure that they come through nicely and mature together and look at the next major games starting with next year.
You said you want Joe to go away, have a break, think about it, discuss with his family. In his immediate reaction, he has both him and Cheng actually have come out and said that there are many races next year, and at this point they are keen to continue. Would MCCY support their application for another deferment if they seek one?
I think that's really quite early to say. As I said, let's start with what they want to do, how they see themselves, and the plans of their coaches and the NSAs as well. It's going to be important. And then we can take a view on this in the longer term together with MINDEF too. But the idea really here is to see a balance between national commitments and also development of sporting achievements. It's something that I think we need to come together with consensus, together with the athlete, most importantly.
So one of the things, Minister, that always happens is that sport sparks very powerful emotions. That's what it does. So obviously there were reactions to Joseph's performance. A lot of them very supportive, some less so. You did mention something about fair weather fans. Would you like to just talk about that a little bit, but also about whether you feel athletes must also be accountable for their performances?
Thanks, Roy. I think that's a very fair, very good question. I would say, as you said, in general, Singaporeans have been encouraging. They know the sacrifices our athletes have made. They've tried their best. I mean, as you've heard from some commentators, no athlete wants to go there, train for so long, make so much sacrifices, and then not do their best. So they've been generally encouraging. When results don't go our way, I think there also has to be a balance in reactions. There will be critics. That's part of life. I think in almost every aspect of society, let alone in performance competitive sports. People can express a view, ask what happened, and I think they're entitled to that. Many Singaporeans do that, in fact, because they care about Singapore sport. They want it to be better. They want to see Singapore perform better, be at the podium. And I think on this, we're all on the same page. So the one thing though is not to be personal in comments or criticisms, and I think this can be damaging and also demoralizing. We've seen many examples of this in other countries. Athletes, when they do well, they're celebrated, they're made heroes of. But when they do badly, the drop is very sharp. and it can become quite nasty sometimes. And sometimes it's about race or about appearances or about labels that we put on athletes unfairly. And this then tends to get amplified on social media, which is, spirals into a negative. We don't have it here, thankfully, and I hope it stays this way. At the same time, when you talk about what we do, I think we do need to take a detailed evaluation, a detailed, honest look at what has happened. We can only move forward if we look back at ourselves critically each time. All of us, and I don't mean the athletes alone, I mean all of us in the entire sporting ecosystem. We have to be frank to discuss what worked for us, what did not. An open, honest conversation between athletes, rather starting with athletes who are in the thick of the competition would be best, but then with coaches, with the nutritionists, the psychologists, with the NSAs, officials. We need to learn what we can do better and then adopt them for the coming competitions. So I think that's this is an important way to learn from every game and make sure that we take on these lessons for the next games.
So one of the things that I really liked during this past couple of weeks is that I see a lot of Singaporeans, whether it's on chat groups or even letters I may get or Sazali may get, really involved in the Olympics, really caring about Singaporean performances and also about performances of athletes across the world. So for this 2 weeks, there's this great sporting spirit within Singapore, but it's something obviously we want to keep going. How do we do that? How do we foster this sporting spirit?
Well, I think you naturally see a high and a peak every time there are games, major
sure.
games and so on, right? And people's interests are peaked because you have that. But along the way, I think the relationship between athlete and the supporter, the Singaporean, is going to be important. So on an institutional side, we have team leader volunteers. I mean, they go out there, they support, and I think they bring a certain vibe to it. But I must say that our athletes have made a tremendous effort over the last couple of years to build that relationship themselves too, particularly during the last 1.5 years of COVID. They made themselves available in the community. They have put themselves out there. They've gone above and beyond just being sporting talent. And I think they made a conscious and concerted effort to build a relationship with fans. And I hope fans appreciate that and also tune in. And perhaps today, perhaps because of social media, there is a greater connectivity. I mean, I look at our Olympians, whether you're talking about Kyria or Mita, Kenyu, who is very popular, Jamin. We also talked about our sailors. I think they all have a following online. I hope to see that grow because not only because they are fans in inverted commas, but because I think they care about the sport and about the development. And certainly, when you care about the sport and you take an active interest in performance and in the athlete, you inculcate a greater following, and that's where you have a potential for a greater pipeline. And I hope to encourage that more. And certainly in my capacity at MCCY, working with Sport SG, working with the NSAs, we will definitely do what we can to put sports on a platform which is more recognized. Rohit, I know you subscribe in that, and so do I. That I think sport is that one thing that unites our community. Is that one element that we can really say is truly colorless, blindless, no creed, no race is involved. And I think it is a real great platform for us to build a social cohesion. It sounds somewhat, passe and cliquish, but a cliche rather. But I think it's really true. And so I do hope that the following of fans for our athletes will grow.
Just curious, that post you made, uh, saying that we should draw a line to or Singaporeans should draw a line to the where the criticism is, for our athletes. Was that
Yeah.
something a result of something that you saw, or something that you heard or something, or was it more preemptive?
Well, it's a bit of both, Sazali. I have followed some of the threads that I've seen, particularly on Joseph, who's probably the most well-known of our athletes, beginning from I think post SEA Games 2019, and they were not altogether constructive. I think some of them became quite personal, and I saw some of these in the immediate aftermath of the heats as well. The free heats, and then after the fly heats. So it's also preemptive in some ways because, as I told Rohit just now, I don't want to see Singapore go down the path of so many other countries. I mean, you've seen the post Euro 2020 reactions. One day a hero, the next day because you miss a penalty, it becomes a race issue. It's very ugly. We've seen what's happened to Naomi Osaka even in these games. after she, as a favorite, lost out to one of the eventual finalists. So, so many of these examples exist overseas, and I hope not to see that happen in Singapore.
So one of the things that has happened in these games and the spotlight has been turned onto is mental health because of what happened with Simone Biles, which was, I think, probably one of the biggest stories of these games. And it is something obviously local athletes have also talked about a little bit here and there. So is
Yeah.
this something that concerns you and something that we must keep an eye on and that you'll be looking at?
Mental health, mental stresses is something that is across most of life now. It's just not just in sports. In sports, I think it's accentuated because every small twitch, every micro millisecond matters so much. So I think to the athletes, they live under a tremendous strain. It's important for us. It's really important for us because at the end of the day, for all the performances and all the achievements, the health and well-being of the athlete always comes first. And it's something that I stress on them. I mean, that's why in part I tell them now, take some time off. I think they deserve it. Put their feet up. Our sailors have been on the road for 6 or 7 months. They've not seen home. So can you imagine the stress that we have on our these two young ladies, not seen home for 6, 7 months, been living in Europe, training, each day thinking about qualification and then performance. What happens? They carry the weight of Singaporeans' expectations on their shoulders, often quietly without much fanfare. So we do have to look after that aspect. SSI, I think, has been very focused on this. But going back to sailing, when I was there at Enoshima, one of the things I saw was the structure around the two sailors. We always see Kimberly and Cecilia, but you don't realize that there is a full-time psychologist. There's a team psychologist that travels with them. We've been there with them for about 3 years or so. Joyce, her name is Joyce Ko from I think it's either SSI or NYSI, and she keeps them on an even keel, uh, making sure that they are okay, not just physically but mentally, addressing issues. She looks out for mood swings, looks out for dips in behavior. There's also a physiotherapist that goes with them, and I think this entire support structure is partly the reason behind why these two were so successful. And it is important that we continue with this in this vein for all our athletes to ensure that they're well looked after, not just physically but also mentally. I would say one more thing, Rohit. It's important that the surroundings, the first responders, as it were, to mental health issues, a coach or fellow athletes, officials, they know how to look out for these signs. It's important. And I think the culture is also important, that we have a culture where we know it's okay to seek treatment. I mean, people find it no skin off their nose to get a massage from someone because you have a muscle ache. It should not be any different if you need to see a psychologist, psychiatrist, to get mental assistance, and it should not be a problem. Just as we say to all our students, to all our workers, everywhere else. I think this is, if we don't deal with this, it's going to be a growing problem. So I like the culture to also change.
Is this something that has been a focus of, as you said, NYSI and SSI for a long time already, or has it been ramped up, in the last year or so, particularly with lockdowns and circuit breakers and so on? Yeah.
I think it's been there. It's been part of the NYSI set of issues, alongside nutrition, sports science, and so on. And there is the SSI psychology team also works in collaboration with the nutrition and the medical team at Sports Science and Medical Center, and they do look at this as an issue. They do regular surveys to keep tabs on well-being. But again, as in almost every sector, this has stepped up in the last 18, 20 months or so because of circuit breaker, where the intensity has been sharpened, where the stresses, I think, have also been a lot more marked. So we will have to keep tabs on this and see where it goes. But I can only say that we can only strengthen those resources and not reduce them, even after circuit breaker is over, and even after we see the back of this pandemic.